White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, no relation to me, is sounding the alarm, according to America's spy agencies. Russia, if you've read the latest news, is preparing to attack. They're going to stage a false flag attack against their own forces, their own pro-Russian militia in Ukraine, in the Donbass region. Stage it as a false flag attack in order to justify a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Are we on the verge of World War III, as the mainstream media is suggesting, or at least as the White House is trying to get the mainstream media to suggest? And welcome to Blackstone Intelligence. I'm Jake Morphonios. I'm going to address that question and a lot more in today's show. What's going on over in Eastern Europe right now is not yet getting a whole lot of play in Western mainstream media, except for occasional spurts of coordinated fear-mongering and propaganda from, our glorious Western Mockingbird media with all of its CIA assets firmly entrenched in our media outlets. Every morning, I get the Wall Street Journal. I skim through it to see some news of what's going on, and I'm consistently disappointed because they don't tell you really what's going on until the CIA puts out all right, we're going to disseminate this. We're not going to put out a little bit here or there. We're just going to hit all at once. We're going to contact our various assets and the New York Times, Washington Post, give them these stories, have a big coordinated propaganda attack all at once. And that serves the geopolitical purposes of the CIA, which is the paramilitary arm of the New World Order. But this is a story that I think you should know about. I'm going to share some of my thoughts with you on it. No, I do not believe we are on the verge of World War III. No, I do not believe that Russia is preparing to attack. So let me dive into this. I'll give you a little overview of what's going on. I'm going to give you some history and give you a little history lesson. I love the history. And after that, we'll go a little deeper into the Ukraine crisis itself and the role that is being played by the power elite in fomenting this discord and spurring this wave of propaganda, which in the story came to my knowledge because Friday night the big headline on Drudge is about this potential false flag attack. Recent news, other than today's stuff out there. If you think back the last handful of weeks, we've seen stories about 100,000 Russian troops. They've massed on the border between Russia and Ukraine, and they are preparing this huge full-scale invasion. The drums of war, boom, 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 pounding. Sounds pretty scary. Problem is that this is just what the point of it is. It's to scare you. It's to scare you to prepare us in the event that support from the American people is needed. If something that our own intelligence services do backfires and does prompt a legitimate response from Russia, where they do act, well, you got to have the American people prepped. You got to tell them in advance, Russia's getting ready to do something. The problem is that what is being said, today and in recent news, this is almost verbatim, exactly what the mainstream media was saying and what the Biden White House was putting out last year. They just, it didn't catch. And now Biden is hurting in the polls I mean, he's even I haven't seen CNN or MSNBC or anyone mention this, but his poll numbers are now worse than Donald Trump's were. He's at like 33%. His poll numbers are lower than what CNN and MSNBC and everybody had this just great time mocking Trump for having all-time low poll numbers, approval ratings from Gallup and, but Biden is actually worse than that now. You don't hear about it. There's Crypto King in the chat now. Hey, brother. And so I would look through my notes because I had written some stuff about this last year. Back on March 31st of last year, the fighting had escalated along the demarcation line inside Ukraine. And this conflict resulted in a series of brutal back and forth killings. Things were getting nasty. As the Ukrainian military, they were the aggressors here. They stepped up their activities. They were remember, Ukraine is backed by, the Western Ukraine is backed by Joe Biden. I told you guys, when Biden won the election, I said, okay, we're going to pull out of the Middle East and pivot to Ukraine and some other areas. And you're going to see things ramp up in those areas. Well, Ukraine did this with Joe Biden in the White House back in March. Just a couple months after he took office, they step up their aggression, going after the territories there in Western Ukraine. And so Russia took some serious actions to demonstrate they were not going to stand idly by and let Ukraine, NATO, the U.S. operating through NATO, operating through Ukraine, they were not going to let Ukraine come in and hem in Russia by putting missile systems and troops and everything along the Russian border there. So what Putin did was he deployed about 100,000 assault troops to the border. This was last year, not this year. Last year, 100,000 troops. He sent in about 1,300 battle tanks, 3,700 drones. There were 1,300 artillery and mortar units, 380 mobile rocket launcher systems, thermobaric batteries. To say that Vladimir Putin was not messing around would have been an understatement. But that's what he did. He stopped them in their tracks. Premium Ship Toasts says, "It's been a while, Jake. Good to have you back. Much love. Deep from the murky waters of Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. Appreciate it." Thank you for that super chat. Now, while Putin denies that he has plans to invade Ukraine and said that he's only fortifying Russia's border in self-defense, okay, fine. I don't want to go totally to Russia's side on this, take his side. I can see why people would be alarmed with this big Russian buildup last year. So in response to what Putin did, now it goes, the ball's back in Ukraine's court. And they call up their own reservists. They deploy 10,000 troops along this conflict line in Ukraine. And it's like 1,500 miles long. And among the Ukrainian forces that are deployed out along this eastern front is a bunch of U.S. military and intelligence operatives, different advisors through, NATO advisors. They're embedded among these Ukrainian forces. And what sucks is that things were improving up until that point. At the end of the Trump presidency, things had started settling down. And I mean, like in the last couple of months, So he's out of office as of January 20th. Biden takes over. By February, things in this eastern part, the Donbass, had actually gone down. Things were settling down. They'd gone from a boil down to a simmer to a kind of a light rolling boil. But just a couple weeks later in March, that's when things changed. And there was an increase in Ukrainian attacks. And one of the things that was shocking, that really fired things up, and it was partly propaganda or exploited through the use of propaganda, something that happened. The Ukrainian forces committed a horrific killing of a 5-year-old child in the Donbass region with a Ukrainian drone strike. Ukrainian military carried out a drone strike, killed a 5-year-old, and so they really played this up. But it's not just the regular Ukrainian military that is the problem in all this. A big problem is that Ukraine supplements their regular military with extremist, ultranational Ukrainian battalions that are supplemented by mercenaries from all over the world. And these mercenaries are getting their training from these NATO advisors. And some of these extremists are real life Nazis. I don't mean Nazi like, oh, they're fascist. I mean, they are Nazis. Some of these soldiers that are, paramilitaries working for Ukraine literally fly the Nazi battle flag over their buildings. And in an ironic twist, a lot of these Nazi extremists, I think that it was the Gray Zone or who it was that did some reporting on this and showed the proof of it. A lot of these Nazi paramilitary extremists who are fighting are using weapons that have been donated to them from Israel. How crazy is that? Israel putting guns in the hands of Nazis? All's fair in love and war, I guess. Squirrel and Weston says, hey, JK, everybody, thank you, brother, for that donation. I love Squirrel and Weston. Speaking of Nazis, what's happening today in the Donbass region looks an awful lot like what was happening in the Sudetenland before the outbreak of World War II. Let me bring up Google Earth and see if I can show you some of this here. How do I flip over to that? Give me a second. Where's my thing here? All right, if we pull out our history books for a moment, the Sudetenland, this was Czechia, Slovakia, used to be Czechoslovakia. Here's Germany over here. So around this region here, you got Germany. The Sudetenland wrapped around here. There was a little bit down here, but it was this area around there. And it's situated along the Sudeten Mountain region on the eastern border of Germany. In the late 1800s, this territory was part of the Austria-Hungary Empire. And a large percentage of the inhabitants were ethnic Germans. You can see, here's Germany, here's what was Sudetenland. So naturally, a lot of them are ethnic Germans. But following World War I, the Western powers cut up and dismembered the former lands of Austria-Hungary, and they created a bunch of new political boundaries. And in the process, Sudetenland was taken from the Germans, and it was placed under control of the newly formed Czechoslovakia. which was, this area here. What it did was it created a kind of a multicultural powder keg between these Sudeten Germans and the Czechs. And so tensions rose, and that's a lot like what's happening in the Donbass today. If we come over here, let me turn this off. I'm going to get rid of my pins here. If I zoom in, I don't want specific location stuff to show up. Okay, there we go. So you've got Ukraine. Over here, this half of this third, I guess you could say, of Ukraine, this is the Donbass region. Down here is the Crimean Peninsula. Okay, here's the Black Sea. And what is this great big thing here? That's Russia. So Russia borders Ukraine right there. You've got Kiev over here. That's the capital of Ukraine. And so over here, the demographics on this side are primarily ethnic Ukrainians. Over here, they are primarily ethnic Russians. About 70%, for example, down here, 70% of Crimea is ethnically Russian. 25% is ethnically Ukrainian. So just like over here, where you've got a problem of the Sudetenland, the Sudeten Germans, and then the Czechs, when you combine them together into a single demographic, and suddenly these people who used to have all kinds of rights and privileges and whatever as Germans are now a minority, second-class citizen group, and the Czechs don't want to share power. Well, that's a lot like what's going on in Ukraine with the demographic over here and the demographic over here. Here's Russia. Naturally, these people are going to be more Russian just by virtue of their location. Now, tensions rose. If we go back and we talk about just the history of the Sudetenland, very, very similar to what's happening in the Donbass. You get a different version of the history of the Sudeten crisis, depending on which perspective you listen to. When we're talking about anything related to the world wars, you have, since there were two major sides in the war, you're going to have two major, or at least in the European theater, two major sides. You're going to have two conflicting perspectives on what things mean. Different ways of looking at history. The Czechs and those who shared their perspective will say something like the Nazi Party in Sudetenland was constantly agitating, constantly causing problems for the Czechs. They say that the Nazi Party was trying to grab political power over all of Czechoslovakia, and that the fascist goon squads were going around beating up Czechs and sometimes murdering them in their, this lustful quest for power. But if you go to the other side of the argument, and you look at the argument coming from the German side, the Sudeten Germans, they say, hey, look, there's this heavy political suppression. There's different political disenfranchisement of the ethnic German population. The Czechs are always attacking us. And so who's right and who's wrong? Well, the truth, in most cases, ends up being a blend of these varying perspectives, right? And that's where I approach most everything. I try and look at both perspectives, weed out and, separate the wheat from the chaff of take out the propaganda from the truth from each side and see what's left over. That's how I approach politics. That's why I'm not a diehard Republican or Democrat. I take whatever's true and valid and try and stay away from the extremist fringes of either side, because that rots your brain and turns you into a puppet. So in the case of what led to, World War II, was a blend of these perspectives. What is universally acknowledged is that this situation in the Sudetenland in 1938, it was untenable. Adolf Hitler goes and decides that they're going to annex the Sudetenland. Hitler proclaimed himself the protector of the ethnic German population there in Czechoslovakia. That lights a firestorm that eventually engulfs, it leads from one thing to the next, and before long you've got all of Europe and much of the Pacific in a grand world war. So, in a very similar situation, you have Vladimir Putin, who has decided to take upon himself the role of protector of the ethnic Russians living in eastern Ukraine. Kind of like Hitler said, I'm going to protect the Sudeten Germans. Putin's saying, I'm going to protect the, but there's so much more to it than that. I'm sure that's true. I'm sure Hitler cared about the ethnic Germans. I'm sure that Putin cares about the ethnic Russians in Ukraine. But there's a lot more to it. There's history there. There's geopolitical history there that also is a significant role. And there's also the issue of money and oligarchy and everything else. So remember, Ukraine was, after all, part of the Soviet Union until the Soviet Union collapsed. The year I graduated high school, 1991. But if we skip forward to 2014, that's when this crisis really started. Following the CIA-backed overthrow of the government of Ukraine and this Western installation of a puppet into the presidency in Ukraine, a puppet who would do the bidding of the Western oligarchy. Until that puppet regime was in there that was hostile to Russia, things were peaceful. People, the people in the East and the people in the West, they had their issues, but there wasn't this kind of civil war going on. But after the West comes, the United States, NATO, the CIA, with funding and financing from George Soros. When all of this happens and they kick out the, duly elected president of Ukraine, who was, to be honest, a puppet of Russia, but when they kicked him out and installed their own, crony in there, well, that pisses off the ethnic Russians, the ones saying, we care about our motherland, former, the Russian Empire, Novorossiya. And so the population of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, they voted overwhelmingly, like 94% or even higher. It was 90-something. They voted to separate from Ukraine and petition Russia to come in and annex the territory and make it part of Russia again. And that is what Vladimir Putin did. And that pissed off the West. Big time. Big time. Going back here, look again. Let me show you here on Google Earth. Here's Ukraine. Crimea has, throughout history, been a hugely strategic place. Why? Let me back up. Here's Russia. Other than up here and just a sliver, really, Russia is landlocked. They can't get out into the Atlantic Ocean. If they need to have a battle with we'll just say, U.S. Navy. How are they going to do it? The only way Russia can do it is to have their fleet come through the straits here from the down into the Black Sea I'm sorry, to down into the Black Sea, and then come through the straits here between Turkey and they can get down here into the Mediterranean and out there. Otherwise, the Russian Navy, they're stuck up here trying to come around, and that's not how it's going to work. Russia has to have the ability to control its navy here. So Crimea, if Crimea was going to be not hostile toward Russia, then everything, it probably wouldn't be a big deal. But when you've got NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, established after World War II, purportedly to hem in the Soviet Union, who had been our allies during World War II, NATO's job was, you just had a fairly small number, I think it was 13 maybe, nations who banded together, formed a military pact, and said if the Soviet Union decides to become kind of the new, Third Reich, if Stalin decides he's going to go on a rampage into Europe and start knocking off Poland and France and all that. Remember, you've got Berlin is divided in half between East and West Berlin, Soviet control and Western control. They're afraid of Stalin. They're afraid of the Soviet Union. And so NATO forms in order to try and agree we're going to all join together, because individually these nations, there's no way that these individual nations could fight off the Soviets. So if you form a bloc with this NATO treaty, if Russia attacks any of them, or if the Soviets attack any of them, then they all respond, and collectively they can fight back against the Soviets. But if you start becoming the aggressors, if NATO or the West starts becoming the aggressors, and they start moving in over here trying to set up missile systems along the border of Russia, that's a different thing. It would be kind of like if Russia or China or whoever came over here to the United States and started putting, for example, missiles in Cuba. What if the Soviets came over to Cuba and started putting nuclear missiles here, pointing them at the United States? How would we react? Well, we know how we would react because we had that exact thing happen. And it was a direct result of the ongoing U.S. meddling, trying to play this geopolitical chess game against the Soviets, and us moving more and more missile systems and troops and putting them in all over the places like chess pieces around here. Well, the Soviets said, if you're going to do it to us, we're going to do it to you. And that's when they came over. We have the 13 hours there of, America's on the verge of nuclear war with Russia. And fortunately, JFK is able to work things out with the Soviets. They back down, pull the nuclear missiles out. And over the decades, including during the Reagan years, there was an understanding that the U.S., through its European proxies, would not advance in aggression toward trying to control or block in the Soviets. The Soviets had first strike capability. The Americans had first strike capability. Either side, the two big nuclear superpowers, either side could be the first ones to launch their nuclear missiles. And so we had this Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction. MAD. And that actually, in a twisted way, by keeping parity between one where neither side had a dramatic upper hand over the other, by being in a position where we could destroy one or the other, neither side would be the first to act, because it would mean the other side would destroy us too. And so the problem for Russia, for the Soviets and now for the Russians, has always been if they lose that parity with the United States, if we make it so that we can strike them and we can also prevent them from hitting us back, now you're no longer on level with each other. Now you have the U.S. empire, the American empire, this hegemony that has spread its tentacles all around the world. Now we have the power to wipe out Russia if we need to, and they can't hit us back. And so anytime the United States goes in and does like Trump did during his term and reneges on decades-old treaties, or NATO goes into more and more nations close to the Soviet Union or former Soviet Union, going into former Soviet states like Ukraine to put in missile systems that could knock out Russia's nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles that they pop off. It is of a matter of survival in the eyes of the Russians, just like it is for us. And, if we reverse the situation, it is a matter of survival to not allow the enemy to take away your ability to hit them back. If me and some other guy are equal, fairly equal in our skills, our fighting skills, we know that, I could probably overcome him but then again, maybe he could overcome me in a fight. We're going to be more cautious about going to war with each other. But if I have a way of sneaking up and maybe cracking that guy in his shins, breaking his shins, so he goes down on the ground, suddenly I'm the top dog. I can pummel him all I want to. So Russia, Vladimir Putin, they are very concerned because they see that NATO, 70% of NATO is U.S. forces, 15% are British forces, and then the remaining 5% or whatever, they're just a smattering of French and Germans, whoever else. But if Russia sees that through NATO, the United States is coming over here and taking these nations on the border of Russia and flipping their alliances from either neutral or pro-Russian to be pro-American and bring those countries into NATO, into the NATO alliance, and then we go in and we put our weapon systems in there, right on Russia's border, just like during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That changes the dynamics of this geopolitical chess game. So, seeing in 2014 that we carried out a coup, CIA has carried out many, many coups in the past. Ukraine was no different. Seeing that we overthrew the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, installed an anti-Russian president that we controlled, Russia says, dang it, we know what's next. They're going to move out here, try and get NATO membership and come in and put forces and weapons on our border. And that's going to hurt that kind of military parity between the two nations. So Russia sees what's going on. With backing from NATO, Ukraine has been waging a war against the separatists who objected to the coup, who said, look, you flipped our government, you install a puppet. This is no longer our country. We are no longer part of Ukraine. We are our own people now. These separatists in the Donbass region in the east, with NATO assisting Ukraine in fighting against them, Russia sees this is not going well for us. We are going to fortify the territory. We are going to supply weapons and our own mercenaries to supplement the separatists so that they can stop Ukraine and NATO from retaking this territory and then using the territory to come after us. Some of the intelligence, when things get hot over there, I'll reach out to some of my contacts that I have that are out there on the front line. So some of them are mercenaries, like actual Americans who went over there, and they are mercenaries. People I've been in contact with for, 9 years now. And in a sign that U.S. intelligence is in bed with big tech, social media companies, some of these people who feed me information, I have seen some of their Facebook accounts suddenly being removed for no violations just because they are putting out information. So there is a very clear effort to snuff out the voices of the people who are presenting this on-the-ground information that conflicts with the pro-war Western propaganda that our own media outlets are feeding us. This development is very troubling. And it's also troubling that while my sentiments on this, I'm kind of coming to the defense of Russia in a way here, but I want to hasten to add that I don't see Russia as the good guys here. They can be right in the fact that they need to be able to defend themselves, but there's more to it than that. They play dirty as well. You've got the Western oligarchy, you've got the Eastern oligarchy, you've got the wicked against the wicked, the elites, the ringleaders, the corporate leaders, the bankers, the political class, while the regular people like me and you down at the bottom of the scale, we're the ones, well, I say we, the people on the ground in Ukraine are the ones that suffer. The people in the Donbass region, they are the ones that suffer. They're stuck. They're stuck between these two superpowers. And this is a pattern that has repeated over and over ad nauseum throughout history. In May of last year, when the U.S. NATO forces backed the Ukrainian forces, when they failed in their attempt to surge into the Donbass, what the USA did was knowing that our side was losing, we sent two of our naval warships through those Turkish straits that I showed you on Google Maps, Google Earth a minute ago, through the straits into the Black Sea to kind of send the message that, hey, Russia, we're the U.S. military. You can't mess. So it's just more of the same. The direct meddling of the United States empire into the affairs of other countries. Putin, though, he is not somebody who is easily intimidated. He responded to the U.S., back last May of us sending our warships into the Black Sea just miles. That'd be like Russia sending their warships during a time of contention between us and them sending their warships into the Caribbean, right off our coast. That's what we did. We sent our warships into the Black Sea, right up there near Russia. So Vladimir Putin said, fine, we're going to start live fire drills in the same waters as the U.S. ships as they come in. And so they started popping off rockets and missiles and everything into the waters fairly close to where the U.S. warships were. This is the kind of geopolitical tit for tat that once, nobody's intending to start a war, but once one of those missiles goes awry or something happens that was unforeseen, suddenly, boom, you've got war. Anyway, And Russia was even saying, we're going to send our nuclear weapons into Crimea. Fine. You send your warships in. Fine. We're going to go ahead and deploy nuclear weapons to the region that we can deploy immediately to take out your naval vessels. It was crazy. And so back then, May of last year, we were getting hit with these headlines that we were just days from World War III. So here we are today. This has been 8 months since that last round of media propaganda about an imminent Russian invasion. And same thing, you've got tools like National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spouting this propaganda. USA, we have to boldly and bravely intervene to stop Russia for the good of all mankind. It's the same garbage today that we pushed last year. And it kind of makes yourself ask, what is this conflict even about? When you get down to it, why is the United States getting involved in this? Who cares? Why are we risking global thermonuclear war? Why is Putin so determined? Now, so what is this conflict about? I can't give you a single answer. There is anyone who tells you that it's just this. It's not a complete answer. There is no single answer because there's different parties involved in all this, and each party has its own agendas. They cooperate with each other for mutual benefit. And if we could sum all of those various agendas up into a nice single answer, it would probably be that the Ukraine conflict is about two things. It's about the greed of multinational corporations and their banking overlords, and it's about the consolidation of geopolitical power. That would be kind of my summary. A significant reason for this conflict is that the New World Order oligarchs, I'm talking about this Anglo-American empire. When I say New World Order, I'm talking about this confederation of banking mafiosi and their multinational corporate puppets from the UK, from various parts of Europe, but primarily from the UK and the United States. Anglo-American empire. The New World Order oligarchs want control of Ukraine's natural resources and their energy markets. Because Ukraine's got a lot of natural gas. A whole lot of it is over there in the eastern Ukraine near Russia. Now, I want you to imagine for a second that there's some guy up on a third floor balcony. You're down on the ground. He's up there. He's got a huge fat stack of $100 bills, and he tosses them in the air. They're gonna fall down. They're gonna spread down, drop to the floor. What would happen with the people down on the bottom? There'd be a mad dash between the different people competing with each other to grab up as much as they can. Then you might end up with some people butting heads, fist fighting, trying to snatch from each other. Imagine this as a typical Black Friday sale in the United States and the chaos that ensues there. Now take that picture and apply it to the Soviet Union after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, because that's basically what happened. You've got two different groups that the Soviet Union falls apart, the bloc falls apart, country after country that had been part of the Soviet state or Soviet Union declare their independence. They don't have any clear leadership. And so two main groups go in. They see all of this vast territory of the former Soviet Union that's now destabilized, and they go in and they start snatching up what they can. And so you've got two groups that are competing for things like the natural gas resources. You've got in one group the oligarchs who favor the Western corporocratic alliance, the Anglo-American New World Order. And then the other group, you've got the Eastern oligarchs who favor the Russian government because they have ties to that's where their power comes from. So you've got these two different sides, both of which are completely corrupt, who work to scoop up all of the natural gas resources from the former Soviet Union, and they do it through their proxies. Who are these proxies? The proxies are Russian oligarchs, Ukrainian oligarchs, Russian and Ukrainian mafia bosses. Now, I've done a lot of reading on that this mafia there in Russia, Ukraine, the governments, not only in Europe, but also their connections from that area to politicians here in the United States. Some of the books that I've used that have kind of informed my perspective on this, some are good, some are better than others. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution talks about it some. Clinton Cash by Peter Schweitzer, The Untold Story of How and Why Foreign Governments and Businesses Helped Make Bill and Hillary Rich. And they've even got a chapter on, I can't read without my glasses anymore. Freaking old man. Yeah, the transfer, Bill's excellent Kazakh adventure, Hillary's reset, the Russia uranium deal, and on and on. So that's one book that's giving me some information. Then there's House of Trump, House of Putin, the untold story of Donald Trump and the Russian mafia, and this, it's presents a certain bias, but you just have to read with discernment. Red Mafia, How the Russian Mob Has Invaded America. There's another one related to Trump. This is just more recent stuff. Trump, Russia, a definitive history, and it talks a lot about the mob connections. You learn about, like, Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign manager, his connections to the Russian-backed president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, and anyway. So I've read a lot on this, and some of what I've learned is that control of Ukraine's natural resources, it wasn't just about making money. If it was only about money, then that's only appealing to the people who are only after money. But a lot of people are. It's not so much the money. It's the game. It's the geopolitical game. Trying to control the gas fields means you have to control the territory, and then you get to work with CIA on one side, KGB on the other, different intelligence groups, because of the strategic importance of stopping the Western NATO alliance from being able to go in and set up a missile system or send in battalions of NATO forces to the western border of Russia. This battle for Ukraine also carries, it's not just about money, it's also about the geopolitical consequences. And that's why I mentioned Manafort. That's why Manafort had been getting paid millions of dollars to help keep Ukrainian President Yanukovych in power. Yanukovych, he spoke Russian. He was a puppet of Vladimir Putin and a puppet of the oligarchs who were loyal to the Russian side of the fight. And it's for that reason that the CIA teams up with George Soros, who funds these NGOs who recruit these neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine to go in and overthrow Yanukovych and install their own puppet who is loyal to the Western capitalists. So you've got both sides are thoroughly corrupt. And that's why I'm saying it just doesn't make sense to cheer for one side or over the other. I do see Russia's side. There's really nothing about the U.S. Oligarchs' involvement that I can support. I can at least understand, for the sake of the people in the towns and villages who just want to live in peace, who don't want to see NATO come in and turn their region into a battlefield. don't want to use them like puppets, put them in harm's way. I empathize with them. That's where my sympathies lie. Because they are stuck in the middle of these globalist vultures that are, tearing their country apart and picking at the bones of them and their neighbors after they've been killed. So up until fairly recently, if you want to, I'll talk for just a second about the claims to the land. It's kind of like the Israel versus Palestine. Who has who gets to claim the land? Israel says, "Oh, well, we've been here for 2,000 years or 4,000 years or whatever." Palestinians say, "Well, the last time you were here was like 2,000 years ago, and we've been here for several centuries in recent history, and so we have the right to be here." We kind of have a similar problem with territorial claims when it comes to Ukraine, because until fairly recently, the territory of today's Ukraine had been part of the Russian Empire for centuries. Russian Empire, put on your history cap with me a second here. Let me put on my Blackstone. We're now doing history. Blackstone history. Russian Empire was established in the early 1700s. It was 1783 that the Russian Empire annexed Crimea, took the peninsula, made it part of Russian territory, and they called Crimea and the eastern region, called it New Russia, Novorossiya. And the territory was settled by two main groups, the ethnic Ukrainians and the ethnic Russians. But it was the Russians that dominated, though there were more of them. The dominant language was Russia. The dominant culture was Russian. So it's just how it is. And it's been like that for the longest time. But then you end up with the Marxist Revolution in 1917. They're around World War I. This collapses the Russian Empire, which until that point had a Christian king. But the Jewish Bolshevik faction, led by Vladimir Lenin, they come in and they just start wiping everybody out. They kill the Tsar. Lenin's Red Brigades, they go around slaughtering any of the Russians who resist the communist tyranny, the Bolshevik tyranny. The opponents of the Marxists, of the Marxist Reds, they were called the White Army, and they end up in all these battles. They kind of make their last stand in Crimea. That's where the Whites had their last stand against the Reds. The Bolsheviks beat them. They send in these terror brigades, slaughtering. They killed 150,000 anti-communists. They were called the Red Terror. And the Bolsheviks go on to seize control of vast territories. That's how you have not just Russia, but all of these other countries are brought in under control of the Bolsheviks. And these individual states, they call them Soviet states. And then collectively, this whole block of them is called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, or we call it the Soviet Union. And in 1954, the Soviets made a huge mistake. At the time, it wasn't a mistake, but now in hindsight, it was a royal screw up. The Soviets transferred control of the Crimean Peninsula to the local leadership in Ukraine, which was a Soviet, it was called the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. But the leadership in the Kremlin, they didn't foresee that the Soviet Union was going to be collapsing in a handful of decades. Like I said, that happened in 1991. And so when Ukraine, after this collapse, when they become an independent state, the Ukrainians, now dominated by the demographic over in the West, the ethnic Ukrainians, they claim control over Crimea because that had been part of Ukraine, even though previously, up until this point, they had been loyal to Russia. Now they say, well, it's still our territory. We don't care that 70% of them are Russians. We don't care that it's a Russian culture. We don't care about any of that. It's ours. And so it, leads to some problems. And so ever since then, ever since 1991, there has been this movement to try by the people in that eastern part of Ukraine to separate themselves from the Western demographic and reestablish something like the old Novorossiya. So, after the Soviet Union collapses, you've got just this free-for-all as Western capitalists, with the backing of the international banking cartel that's funding them. They swoop into all of these former Soviet territories, feasting on the resources of the people. The regular people are like, what the hell is going on? These people are screwing us. But at the same time, the Russian government, they're still intact. Even though the Soviet bloc has dissolved, you've still got the Russians. They are competing against the Western-backed oligarchs by backing oligarchs of their own. Now, when I say oligarch, in case you don't know what an oligarch is, it's not just a rich person. You can't just say someone who's rich is an oligarch. Oligarchy is someone who is very, very rich, using their wealth to influence political decisions, to either co-opt politicians or political policy in ways that favor them and help them to make even more money, or to get a politician or legislature to do something that favors the people backing you, like Russia. And that way your reward's not going to be directly from what say someone in an oligarch over there in Russia or in Ukraine who's kind of backed by the Russians. If he can co-opt somebody in the U.S. government, get something done politically that ends up benefiting the political powers in Russia, that oligarch can get rewarded, or vice versa. There's just various combinations of ways that these oligarchs use their influence to bring about political change. So that's an oligarch. What do you think is going to happen when you end up with these international bankers who team up with dishonest politicians, mafia thugs, and these very wealthy, powerful oligarchs, like George Soros is an oligarch, and they all go in and they're making money together in largely unregulated markets? Would it really surprise you to learn that in a circumstance like that, with these bad people in unregulated markets, that there's going to be a great deal of corruption, political corruption, business corruption? Of course it wouldn't surprise you. These oligarchs, they acted like hungry sharks. They go in, they gorge themselves in a feeding frenzy on all of these post-Soviet resources like coal and oil and aluminum. Oleg Deripaska was big into the aluminum industry. Other minerals. And of course, some of the oligarchs got into the dirty banking business to provide capital investment into burgeoning corporations that were controlled by yet other oligarchs. So you've got corrupt politicians, you've got mafia dons. They hold sway in certain regions. They suddenly find themselves getting financial support, huge amounts of financial support, where they could only do so much here. But now with the backing of this money, They can now expand and rapidly accumulate control over resources. So if you're a crook, if you're kind of a thug, like a local warlord, a local, like corporate warlord, and you're doing this bad stuff, you're willing to go in, send your teams in with their baseball bats to bash up some workers, or you want to take control of this company and the guy won't sell it, so you in an atmosphere where corruption is rampant, you send in your goons and they go beat the guy up, say, we're going to kill you if you don't give us control of your business. So he does, because he'd rather do that than die. If you take someone like that and you infuse them with a massive amount of money and political connections to where they can do that same thing on a grand scale, and then in exchange for the bankers getting their cut, and whether it's partners in crime or whatever, well, that's what happens in the post-Soviet Union. You end up with these oligarchs getting bigger and bigger and more powerful. They become filthy rich billionaires, and with that wealth, comes power and influence. And when you've got people with power and money, there's always going to be people who will seek to curry the favor of those people. You can look online, look up, do a Google image search for John McCain and George Soros, and just look at the fawning countenance of John McCain as he's talking with George Soros. These people will roll out the red carpet for the people with money. It's a very bad atmosphere of pervasive corruption over there in Ukraine. Corruption is the universal product of oligarchy. It's not just their monetary wealth that makes someone an oligarch. Like I said, it's their heavy influence over politics and the economics of a nation. Sorry, I got the COVID. They take control of the economics of a nation or the politics, which gives you control of the economy. It's derived from the control of resources through that oligarchs, companies, or banks. And so most of these Ukrainian oligarchs, they didn't have anything to start with. They didn't have any significant wealth. It's just that, like I said, during the 1990s, they become kind of thuggish entrepreneurs during the nation's transition from a market-based economy. You get the Ukrainian politicians. They were little more than the puppets of these oligarchs. They were crafting legislation that benefited the businessmen. And the businessmen found that they could gain even more leverage by bribing enough members of a certain political party to take control of that party. George Soros is very good at that. He's done that in several Eastern European countries, and in a couple countries, because he has done that, kind of taken control of an entire party through bribery and all this leverage he gets over them. He's been banned from a couple of countries over there because his influence is so horrible. I don't know how much he's doing these days compared to what he had been doing a decade ago, because he's older. His son's not nearly as savvy as his dad George is. But anyway, these politicians, they go on to collude with the rising oligarchs. They use their positions in government to give. They were privatization vouchers. They were giving certificates that transferred what was previously publicly owned land or publicly owned assets or resources, things that when it was a Soviet state, it was not privatized. Well, now without the Soviet state, suddenly we got all these resources. So you get the corrupt politicians saying, we're going to give you these privatization vouchers to an oligarch or a rising oligarch. And these private business owners become that much richer. The politicians get their various kinds of kickbacks, and Now, in the beginning, America, we didn't care about this rampant corruption going on over there. We had our hands in it. The problem was when Russia started to win the allegiance of a growing percentage of these oligarchs over there, suddenly the American government is very concerned about the corruption going on over there. We don't like the corruption in Ukraine. We loved it when we controlled the oligarchs, but now that Russia has bought them up, we're very concerned about this. In the case of Ukrainian corruption, the oligarchs and the companies, if they were loyal to the Western bankers, they got a pass. They didn't get sanctioned. They didn't get in trouble. But if they were loyal to the Russian government, they would be placed under investigation. They would be jailed when possible. At the very least, their bank accounts would be seized. Company assets would be seized. The CIA would go in and fight against them, undermine them. And of course, the converse was true from the Russian perspective over there. Russia would use its resources and its assets and intelligence to undermine the oligarchs that were loyal to the Western bankers. So the main thing I want you to understand about the dynamics of Ukraine and its corruption is that corruption is in the eye of the beholder. One man's evil oligarch is another man's virtuous job creator. When you read when these stories come up, I don't know if anybody out there reads the newspapers anymore or reads much about this. But if you do, and you find that it's heavily skewed against Russia, very heavily favors the Western perspective on it, just know that it's propaganda. It's not a well-rounded presentation of the facts. For example, when Trump was running, there was no end to the talk about, Hunter Biden's laptop, Hunter Biden and Burisma, and all of this. Remember that during the campaign season? And the social media companies, big tech, they're banning people left and right for talking about this, for sharing information. And in my opinion, the Trumpers totally had it wrong. The things that they cared about, that they thought were a big deal, was all the seedy stuff like, Hunter Biden and his sex and his crack use and all of that. Look, if you think that that's a big deal, I mean, that's par for the course for these people. That's no big deal. It's that it was his connections, what was going on. And today, now that Joe Biden is president and the mainstream media just, they defend him at all costs. Now Hunter Biden's back to being this fine, upstanding guy. And I think he put out an art book or something. I don't know. But they don't look at Hunter Biden as being a corrupt guy. Or talking about the corruption of, potential corruption there involved with Joe Biden. Now, I'm not going to go into it. I'll save this story for another time because it's super long. But in a nutshell, here's the story of Hunter Biden. When Joe Biden was the sitting vice president, Barack Obama put him in charge of working directly with Ukraine. And Ukraine at this time, they're trying to, you've got the coup going on in 2014, all this stuff. Lots of corruption, endemic corruption. Well, at that time, Biden's son Hunter teams up with another guy, Christopher Hines, who was the stepson of Senator John Kerry. John Kerry at that time was the chairman of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee for the U.S. Senate. He would go on shortly thereafter to become Barack Obama's second Secretary of State after Hillary Clinton. But Hunter Biden and John Kerry's son, Christopher, stepson, they go into business together. They use their daddy's positions to curry favor with the politicians and with the some of the businesses in Ukraine that were seeking favor from U.S. They wanted good U.S. policies to favor them. And Hunter and Christopher use these kind of connections, and they get rewarded for it because the corrupt oligarchs over there see that, hey, we can influence U.S. foreign policy that's decided by Senator Kerry and Vice President Biden, or at least influenced by it. We can get to them through their kids. And so they gave their kids these jobs as they didn't do anything. Like Burisma, he didn't actually do anything illegal. He was like an advisor. Hunter Biden was like an advisor. He had no experience in this. It's like most corporate advisors today. They don't do anything. It's just their names, having your name attached. A big name, big powerful businessman or a big name politician sitting on your board of directors or whatever, or on your advisory board, kind of like Dick Cheney and CIA Director James Woolsey and some of these other big names sitting on the board of Genie Oil. They're not Lord Jacob Rothschild. He's not doing anything he has nothing to do with the day-to-day operations of Genie Energy, but still. So Hunter Biden gets put onto the board there, and he's paid these fees, and he's racking up millions of dollars. Not because he's doing anything really helpful, because he is a conduit between the corruption in Burisma, which was connected to the Ukrainian government, from them through Hunter Biden to his dad, with the unspoken expectation that there would be some payback. We're going to give Hunter Biden millions and millions of dollars, and we expect something in return. They may not put it in writing, and this is why there's really no strong paper trail to really tie. It's not so much that Hunter Biden was doing anything illegal. It's the environment of corruption. It's this unspoken corruption, unspoken favoritism and expectation of, a quid pro quo. So anyway, I can go deep into that story more, tell you details on that some other time, but there are tons of examples of deep political corruption like that. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So here we are today. Let's bring it back to today. We have got a situation spiraling out of control in Eastern Europe, a situation that could hypothetically turn into a global war. We're not there now. We're not on the precipice of World War III. Russia is not getting ready to invade Ukraine. They are amassed on the border like they have been for 8 months now, and they mean business. Vladimir Putin will not tolerate any advancement from the Ukrainians coming into the Donbass region and trying to retake it militarily. That is what would trigger a Russian military response. So if you want to watch for something, and the West knows it, so if you want to see, or if you want to kind of anticipate what's going on, don't pay so much attention to what Putin is doing. Look and see what the government of Ukraine is doing. See what U.S. foreign policy is doing to push or incentivize, or NATO to incentivize Ukraine to send forces over. The truth is, Ukraine doesn't have the forces. They would get crushed in an instant by Russia. Russia would pound the hell out of them, grind them to dust in a matter of days. So they're not going to do it. Ukraine's not going to go over there and pick a fight with Russia. It's a stalemate. Russia is going to let the separatists continue to maintain control. I've got contacts there in it. I hear from them. There's always this low-grade fighting going on. There's shelling from Ukraine and the Ukrainian mercenary forces against the mercenary forces and the separatists and the Russian-backed mercenaries there in the Donbass. That's going to continue. But if you see Ukraine move for somehow, if something happens, that's when things could get bad. But because Putin has no intention at this point, he has no intention of invading Ukraine, that's why we see stories like we saw come out from Jake Sullivan from the White House just in the last 24 hours, saying that U.S. intelligence is saying that that Russia is planning a false flag attack against its own forces as justification, to try and frame it on Ukraine, so that Russia can finally go in and do what they wanted to do all along, which is take all of that territory and get us into a global war. That, to me, more than anything, suggests a preemptive propaganda war, because perhaps Ukraine is planning on doing something to try and provoke Russia. Maybe they are going to try and ramp up some of their, paramilitary activities or something. Who knows? But I don't believe that story to be true. Now, there are a couple other things that could set things off and change circumstances. If that happens, I will tell you about it. I will share with you my perspective. And things could spiral out of control, but we are not there. We are not there. A lot would have to happen between now and then. The problem is that we have sitting in the White House right now, we've got a politician, Joe Biden, who has a history of supporting not only a U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine, which to me that disqualifies him as a legitimate president right there. Our founding fathers were very, very clear not to meddle in the internal affairs of other nations. The fact that he played a role in the coup to overthrow Ukraine and put a puppet in, and that his own kid profited to the tunes of millions of dollars in the process, that tells me all I need to know about Joe Biden. But the thing is, he's also sitting there with historically low polling, and he is getting hammered on every side. So some politicians are the kind who are willing to kick off some kind of military conflict in order to save face or boost their own numbers. I don't think Joe Biden is that crazy. I don't think he is. But I also think that he's kind of... I think that if the military-industrial complex or NATO forces or the CIA, they'd be my first guess as to, who would screw things up. But if any of them did spark some kind of serious conflict with Russia, I do not believe that Joe Biden would really say, all right, everybody, let's just let the Russians have this one. I think that he would try and project strength and, take his own action to try and make it seem even or whatever. And if Putin responded, then now we're in this, in this dance. Biden's a tool. I do like that Joe Biden is more civil. I hate the animosity and the destruction of civility that Donald Trump brought to America. And I do appreciate that about Joe Biden, that he is not a person who is very divisive in that way. But that's about all I can say about Joe Biden. I think he's inept as a leader. I think that he is old, wishy-washy. He gets pushed around by the progressives. I think the guy's time is, he's a placeholder. I do pray for him. I do hope that he maintains his, he doesn't become more senile or whatever. I want us to have, regardless of which party is in control in the White House, I want our leaders to be as capable as possible for the good of the country. But anyway, rest assured, as this story unfolds, if it unfolds, I will be here to report the facts to you. I'm not beholden to those mockingbird news agencies that parrot the propaganda from the CIA and the New World Order. You know I have a reputation for presenting a balanced view of these issues to the extent that my perspective allows. So I'll be here for you.